I just now said something that was, nothing is as it appears.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not true. Is it? I mean...
Well, it isn't, it isn't.
It seems to me that everything is exactly as it appears.
Yeah. Reality is completely clearly revealed. Unreality does not appear.
You make suppositions about it.
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah, and that's real. Making the suppositions is real.
Yeah.
What the suppositions claim to be is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very subtle, isn't it? There's the it really depends on, nothing is as it appears or nothing is as it seems. It depends on what you mean by seems and appears. Everything, reality appears and nothing appears but reality. So in one sense, everything is exactly as it appears and is exactly what appears. But I think the sense in which that statement is usually intended is interpretations. So, nothing is as it appears. As it appears is generally taken to be a euphemism for, what you take things to be. So the interpretation is smeared in there with the actual presence. It's slippery, I mean, for me, the simplest way to approach this is in terms of positivity, which is just to go to what is present, be with what is present, and as it is present, and that is reality. But again, that is subtle because you have to actually be with it.
You have to be with it.
Well, I came out of the bar the other night, and I said, "Oh wow, it's foggy," and I saw fog everywhere. And then I said to John about the fog, and he says, "What fog?" And then I turned around, and it wasn't there.
She told me it disappeared in like the 10th and second.
I actually saw it. So, there also seems to be reality that is there because of how it's seen.
But that's all that's there. There is no fog. There never was fog. There's no BART. All there is experience. And you can experience what you call fog. You can experience what you call not fog. And they're actual. If you experience fog, that's actual experience. It's not fog. Because fog is an interpretation. And what can experience seem to be like? Well, there's absolutely no limit to what experience can seem to be like. And experience is not particularly, well, let's say it's not at all consistent with itself, or continuous with itself, or contiguous with itself in terms of how it appears. It can appear to be this way and then appear to be something completely different in the next or even the same instant. And it will. And you can't draw any conclusions from that because the fact alone is the only fact. The fact of experience is the only fact. And since it has no consistency, all bets are off. But experience is actual. But experience is not actual X. Experience is actual experience. So experience is not of fog or of not fog. Experience is of experience.
Experience rules.
Yeah, and fog or not fog and clarity and not clarity and all that is just spin doctoring and is completely irrelevant. And to the extent that occurs, that is itself is experience.
I made an assumption, and the assumption was that she's hallucinating,
Sure.
which was actually, from my perspective, quite accurate.
Sure, but that's just another way of saying that her experience diverges from your experience.
Absolutely.
It doesn't invalidate her experience
No,
or validate yours. It's just.
But it obviously wasn't accurate, because then I turned around and it was gone. I mean,
Well,
it was just actually
what does
wrong.
accurate mean? It was accurate to the extent it was your experience.
It was, but
Well, then there's no but. It's just it was your experience, period. And then in the next instant, your experience was something different. Okay. You might have had an instant of where you fell asleep and dreamed or hallucinated something, and that's your experience then. And it's not inaccurate or untrue. It's just that's what it looks like in that instant. Experience can look like anything, but it's always the same thing, i.e. it is always experience. It is always what I call radiant presence. And it looks the way it looks, and it looks like anything. And it doesn't actually look like anything because you can't actually pin down what it looks like ever. In other words, you can't know what you're experiencing in terms of detail or situational context or, there's no way to get a handle on the fullness of what you're experiencing in terms of, well, certainly in terms of describing it, but even more profoundly in terms of inclusively, summing it up in any way whatsoever. Experience is intrinsically open-ended. So it's in other words, it's like a vanishing point. Experience always just goes on and it gets to a point where it's there, but you can't tell what's going on, and that's always intrinsically in experience. So experience is always vague, it's always indeterminate, and yet is always very precisely, specifically itself too. And those conditions are not, as paradoxical as it sounds, those conditions are not in opposition. They are just what this is.
I found it useful to point out to myself when I'm caught in some interpretation that's really elaborate and it's causing me a lot of pain, and then I remember orient to what's actual, and 99% of it drops away pretty easily because it's obvious that whoa, that's just a dream.
Yeah.
And I'm really believing it, and I'm having pain from it, and imagining the fear of this and that, and it's really easy to see what's not actual.
Yeah, it's very easy. And when you, as you get more and more skilled at orienting towards actuality, you discover liberation, i.e. you discover that you are not actually in any particular conditions. You don't actually consist of any particular conditions. So there's nothing that you can be threatened by that's appearing, and there's nothing that you are that is vulnerable that could be threatened. So the whole thing turns into a kind of a zero-sum game where there's no, there are no situations, there's no context, there's nothing, there's no problems, there's no solutions, there's no threats, there's no defense, there's none of that is even relevant. It's just completely transcendental presence. And actuality reveals directly that it is that. I mean, that's the power of this yoga. It's just go into the actuality. It will communicate and will clearly reveal its transcendental nature. And that is comprehensive, that you are that everything is that. So there is no implications whatsoever to anything. Everything is a kind of a transparency.
Since every instant it's changing,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way it could be held together the way that my mind, everything my mind thinks, depends on continuity and structuring things. And
all that. Yeah, exactly so. In consecutive instances, everything changes, and even in any instant, nothing is resolvable. So, I mean, on every aspect, there's no coherence.
is there any change in the experience when you go from waking, transition from waking into dream?
No.
Because the experience seems to, between the dream and the waking, in the dream state it doesn't matter, but in the waking state it seems to matter.
Well, dream state can seem to matter too. And waking state can seem to not matter.
Okay.
Depending on how you're with it. Dreams can be very, impactful. You can be in a dream and think it's actual and be worried about things and have things that are threatening, or have things that seem to be important, or have things that are goals that you're really fighting for or something. So there can be a lot of investment in a dream as well, or not. And the same condition holds true in the waking condition. You can hold things to be really important and matter and be threatening or be desirable in all these various conditions, or not, or you can see that that's just not the case, in which case it's just exactly like a dream in the sense that there's no implications, there's no repercussions, there's no actual event. It's just a kind of a crazy display of patterns.
So the dream state and the waking state are just different modes of experience.
Yeah, the same thing. Yeah, sure. And deep sleep as well. Any condition. There's only one condition, and it is always itself. And it looks like what we call, waking, dream, deep sleep, and any other condition that people want to try and classify is going to be just another way of splitting hairs about this fundamental condition. That is always the case.
I find in dreams that I tend to believe in my perception, my interpretations much more than I do when I'm awake.
Mm-hmm.
I have moments of tension in dreams which I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems to be a residue of my past.
Yeah, I think that's, I can relate to that. I think that with realization is bolstered by the, I guess you'd call it the analytic component or the self-aware component that is more readily available in the waking condition. Whereas in the sleep condition, it's easier to go into a relatively unconscious condition where the sort of the latent tendencies just have their play, and there's no checks and balances of looking at it and going, wait a minute, hold the phone, this is bullshit. But I think that over the long term, living with realization, in my experience, that sort of percolates down, and eventually dreams become clearer and clearer as well.
Yeah, because I'm not doing that process mentally when I'm awake of this isn't real.
No.
Or this is my interpretation. That kind of has dropped, but it still happens in my dreams.
Yeah.
Not always, but sometimes quite intensely.
Mm-hmm.
I was describing a dream today to Emma, and it was just, had I had that thought when I was awake, I wouldn't have had that thought when I was awake.
Yeah.
So it comes down and it'll permeate all my dreams too.
I think so. That was my experience. I think that after realization, up till realization, my dreams were very intense, and they were involving, and I was invested in them, and things of great importance were happening, and I was, thrashing around and struggling with things and all. And after realization, I think there was a protracted period where that kind of very gradually sort of died down. Mm. Now my dreams are very much like my waking experience, which is sort of a bemused non-entity. Yeah. Where it's just sort of weird patterns, and I'm sitting there with it going, wow, too much.
Good. I look forward to that.
In my experience, realization is not a final condition. It's kind of a major paradigm shift, but the progressive refinement is ongoing, probably, I assume, forever, where it just progressively deepens and deepens and deepens. And very much as happens before realization, where your subtlety and your sophistication and what all being with things more sophisticatedly deepens and deepens and deepens. So realization is kind of an arbitrary turning point. You sort of turn the page and wow, the paradigm kind of shifts, things turn inside out in a funny kind of a way. But the actual process that has been ongoing continues. So it's sort of more of a milestone than an actual event.
Would you call the self, looking at the self, seeing the self exposed, a refinement, or just a loop that's actually deceptive?
It's the mechanism of refinement, and it's ongoing. But the self isn't really the self.
I know.
And the self, the unreal self, or the erroneous or sloppy interpretation of self as self, refines itself, and ultimately refines itself down to what it actually is, which is reality itself looking at reality. And you can still call it the self if you want. Some traditions do. They call it the Atman and so on. And that is what the self actually has been all along. So it's not like the self disappears, but it's no longer clumsily interpreted as a separate personal self. It is seen to be the primary condition, which is this looking at itself.
So it's the actual looking and the insight or the awareness of what had been erroneously considered a self is the actual important part. It's the lookingness or the insight.
Well, the lookingness and progressive insight is the very mechanism of reality.
Is the real self.
Yeah, it is the real self, and it always has been and always will be. But it is intrinsically, let's call it transcendental. So it's not a self in any sense that you could possibly wrap your head around or could feel entrapped within or could feel limited by. All of that is a misinterpretation. But the fundamental process of the looking is the very process of reality itself. The absolute is looking at itself. That's a pretty comprehensive description of what is happening here outside of space and time space and time are just symptoms of that, and not the only symptoms of that. As well as all of our experience and all of our psychological functioning and everything else are also symptoms of that. In fact, everything whatsoever is a symptom of that.
And there is no looking and there is no self.
Right. There's not actually. It's kind of a heavy-handed way of putting it. The actual condition cannot be said.
So the process or the experience of like this amazing insight just coming from nowhere, is, but sometimes it's not really accurate, and sometimes it is. It's like exposing amazing trips that you actually want to see, but suddenly
Sure.
it's all exposed.
Mm-hmm.
That that is the transcendental. I mean, that is the transcendent.
Well, all of it is, but yeah, that is certainly. Its mode is looking at itself and having insight. The looking is insight. The looking is always revealing. The looking is always a revelation. It's an ongoing, never-ending waterfall of insight, forever. And again, as we deepen in our sophistication or our subtlety with being with what this is, as we unfold, we are more powerfully and more transcendentally with what's actually being revealed in these revelations and these insights. And at first they seem relatively trivial and personal and conceptual, and as we progress they become subtler and subtler until we're having these amazing inconceivable, nonverbal intuitions about reality itself that express themselves in ways that are incommunicable. But it's the same phenomenon that was happening when you're just having, relatively personalized, little ahas. Those are actually transcendental ahas, but they're being interpreted sort of without nuance, without subtlety, let's say. And as you unfold, unfoldment in one sense is a way of being able to be with your experience more and more subtly, progressively. Because your experience already is intrinsically very subtle, but when we're with it more ignorantly, when we're with it more immaturely, we're rounding it off. We're only being with it in terms of sort of the more coarse harmonics of it. And as we get more and more sensitive and start including the really fine little details and sizzles and nuances, then it begins to reveal its grandeur, and we get how inaccurate our previous, rounding offs actually have been. But it's not a change of condition.
Okay, well, sometimes I feel, okay, let's get on with it. I know that this is just a personal self, and
but that's the process. It has its own time, and the degree to which you want to try and be with it to maximize efficiency. Try and be with your experience textually, and non-verbally and non-conceptually, and just feel it, and then you'll be being with it on the cutting edge of your sensitivity, on the cutting edge of your nuance. Rather than just sort of looping back and being with it in familiar ways. Sort of always just drop everything and all of a sudden, be an unknowing to whatever extent you can, and you'll be pushing the envelope of your own sensitivity. And your intelligence will, it's like fishing, your intelligence will actually bring back something from those experiences and incorporate them and intrinsically refine your own sensitivity. You're being able to be with this more subtly.
But it can also bring back other truth too.
Well, anything, yeah, but anything it brings back is itself.
Yes.
So it's a self-refining process. But I mean, that's the very essence of the yoga of radiant presence, which is very simple, which is to be with the actuality of your experience in real time outside of the context of interpretation. That's all. Just be with actual experience without knowing what it is, without holding it what it is. And even if you're holding what it is, find a little nook and cranny where you're not and be with that. So you don't need to do battle with the part of you that's interpreting things and say, no, shut up. It's not a war or a battle. You just sidestep it. So suppose your mind is busy and you're sitting here spinning interpretations a mile a minute, which of course we're all very familiar with, but you just sort of, let your attention drift over somewhere that's just out of left field, and just feel what that feels like over there. Just feel it. And that's sufficient. You know, it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually very powerful. Because you'll find, as you get more skill at being able to do that what you're finding there is actually the same thing that's here where you're interpreting it, and all of a sudden you'll notice how even in the things that you're holding to be a certain way, there's so much more that you've been missing. And all of a sudden that starts opening up too. So it's kind of a trickle-down spirituality. It's real simple. So you give all your money to the rich people, and then the economy will work great.
But it can also work as a flood as well as trickling.
Oh yeah, big time, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's that's hole in one. But it'll never be a non-entity. It's never nothing.
No.
It's always a win. It's always a gain. Just to touch experience, to touch raw experience, it's always a plus.
Peter, is the experience made up of the one who sees as well as the seen?
Sure, but there is no one who sees, and there's no thing seen. It's just this. This sees, and this is seen.
Okay.
In actuality, it seems as we're used to thinking of it as there's a seer, there's something that's seeing, and there's something being seen.
Right.
And that's fine because that's how we're used to looking at it, but that's not actually accurate. But anywhere, any portion of that reveals reality because it's reality that sees and it's reality that is seen. And as you develop the facility to be with that more and more profoundly, this becomes clearer and clearer that the self is the other and the other is the self. In other words, it's just a one continuum.
I guess I mean, anything that I hold to be actuality would never be accurate.
Right.
But I think I put too much effort into trying to touch reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably just back into holding something to be other than what it is.
Yeah. You know, you have it, the whole mode of this is one of looseness, of dropping everything. I mean, that's why the yelling technique is really good. All of a sudden, just yell at the top of your lungs, whatever, and just in that instant, just because it's like setting off a firecracker, or you find yourself just dropping everything just mechanically. It just happens, and you don't need to try to do anything. It just you just bang. It's all of a sudden, whoa, what happened? And then of course you regather yourself almost instantly. But there's that little moment where everything is just sort of dropped, but it's not nothing.
Yeah.
So that the trick is not, because again trying is more holding, and the trick is to just let go of everything. And granted, when we're used to orienting towards holding, even in subtle ways, that can be a trick, because again we try to let go, which is holding, which is more holding. So there's an art to discovery of being able to do that.
Or you get to a point where just anything you could possibly conceive of or conceptualize or anything you can think of is not accurate, so you just kind of drop it all and you're just kind of like...
Yeah, but the dropping is the mode. The mode is dropping. The mode is just... Or you can literally drop. That's a yoga technique. You just...
Don't do it. Don't break anything. Drop a little more.
Try that sometimes. See what it's like. See what happens.
God, he does.
When you're falling, it's very interesting.
The folks on the web missed it.
Don't try this at home.
No, come to Pam.
I'll be Pam, he said, yeah.
But there's also, when you do drop, let go or drop things or drop holding patterns, it just seems like there is a positive flow that
Yeah.
starts to happen.
Of course.
And it's like nothing that you're doing. It just
Yes.
just kind of happens.
Yeah. And it's exactly the same positive flow that's happening when you're holding.
Mm-hmm.
But it's harder to notice because we're interpreting it as that we're holding things together.
Yeah.
But when you stumble onto this, in this openness, there's all of this flow and positivity and everything's doing itself, and gosh, you're actually off the hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, that's the truth. When you let go of everything, nothing vanishes, nothing goes away. Everything is still here and it's all still happening without your effort at all.
Yeah.
Your heart still beats, you still breathe, thoughts still pop into your head, but you're not doing anything. And that reveals that this is doing itself. We're so used to clinging to our actions and our identifying with what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and what we're, all of this stuff. And it's a kind of a over control, but it's all a pretense because in actuality, it's pretend. It's like, I don't know if you remember, I used to talk about, that a toddler's driving seat that has a wheel and a horn and a gear shift, but it's not connected to anything. And they're sitting there pretending the car's going along, they're going like this, and honking the horn, but it's not. They can pretend they're driving the car, but it's not actually hooked up to anything. And that's just what we do. We pretend we're making our decisions and we're trying this and we're working to do that. But it's all pretense because in actuality it's doing itself. And you see that because when you let go, everything still happens. Everything. Nothing stops. Absolutely nothing stops. And it's so much easier because you're off the hook. But again, we typically have these native modes of holding, and so we have to gradually educate ourselves by putting ourselves into this noticing of the free flow of things. And it's much, much, much more efficient to go to the free flow. Don't try to fight the holding, because that just feeds it. So don't try to not hold, because that is just a holding itself. So it's a letting go, dropping everything, which is not a holding, and then the free flow makes itself known, and gradually, or maybe not so gradually, but at any rate, the free flow will dominate and will reveal that it is actually the inherent mode.
And it becomes, I guess it becomes, well, it feels like it becomes more like just a watching.
Yeah.
Watching things happen.
Yeah, and it always has been a watching things happen, but we've had this pretense of, I'm doing it, I'm controlling it, I'm the doer, But it's all just a pretense, and we don't notice it's a pretense. We think the steering wheel is actually hooked up to something, but then we wonder why things don't go where we want them to. Mm-hmm. If I'm in control, how come my life isn't going where I want it to? Actuality is an astounding positivity. It's completely positive. It is doing everything. It is fulfilling everything. It is achieving everything. It is giving everything. It's what everything comes from and everything is supplied from. It's this amazing, generous, constantly radiant positivity.
Peter scared it.
What happened?
Your little mouse. You scared the little mouse that lives here. He's running all around. Great.
Come home with me.
There's a mouse here? I didn't know.
That's good.
I just saw him poke his nose out from behind the bookcase.
Oh, okay. Yes.
He's come to learn.
There you go. You can probably just stay there for a while.
In the right house.
Without the story generating thing going, it just seems so effervescent.
Yeah.
It's like it's just the whole thing springs forth like a surprise every
Yeah, exactly. You get how lively it is, how positive it is. I mean, it's so much more mean, this radiance is astounding. The process of interpretation is largely a dumbing down, a limitation, a slowing down. It's a process of inhibition. And when we don't do that, or when we're with our experience rawly, we're not inhibiting it, and we see that how radiant it is. I mean, it's astounding. It's just completely astounding. Just every instant, it's just exploding. With amazing, surprising spontaneity and vibrancy and vitality. Yeah, I mean, completely. And that's actual. That's what it is, and it always is that. It is that even when we're interpreting it, but then there's a dumbing down process where we don't let ourselves notice that. We don't let ourselves be with it that way, because we're only noticing the real slow harmonics of that. So we don't let ourselves acknowledge all this instantaneous sizzle and fizzle and radiance and sparkle of it.
A couple of times recently, it's happened to me that things, a situation which seems very difficult is just sparkling with possibility, and it's just
sure.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Where's the problem? This is great.
Yeah.
In the same situation.
Yeah, that's how it is. But everything is always completely open and unstuck, and spontaneous and free. And that becomes really obvious when you're with it as it is. It only seems to be stuck or constrained or challenging or threatening or something when you're not letting yourself be with what's actually present, the fullness of it.
Mm-hmm. If you go back to the storyline instead of the emerging.
Because storylines are essentially censorship. You're essentially limiting the bandwidth, The present moment is just amazing, wham, download of just amazing information, intelligence. And the storyline censors that, cuts most of it out, and it's like, nope, not that, not that, not that, not that. Don't notice that, don't pay attention to that. This isn't, just notice this little thing here. And so the story is heavy-handed censorship, which feels like a dumbing down, feels like a dullness, feels like a stuckness, feels like a lifelessness. It feels like separating things from other things, separating subject from object, all these things. And in the incredible hyperdimensional vibrancy of actuality, that's just not the case. Things are so non-linear, so alive and intelligent and open-ended. And this just becomes very obvious.
They're also holographic, so that when you get down to that little piece, that is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, its information density is infinite. On any level of scale.
So the holding patterns then are really not valid information or valid data or valid anything.
No, because they're oversimplifications.
But I don't feel responsible for any holding patterns. They just pop up.
Yeah, you're not responsible for it.
So I mean that will just keep going on in its own mode, and I'm not really provoking anything.
Yeah, but nothing keeps going on because everything changes, everything morphs, everything mutates and develops, and you will find yourself spontaneously, progressively being with it more and more deeply, more and more subtly. And what seems like holding patterns that you're looking at today will be subtler than you could have conceived of 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it'll still, there's this funny phenomenon in unfoldment that it's easy to feel like you aren't changing. Everything is the way it always was, because as your sensitivity increases, you're actually being with things much more finely and more subtly, but the well, how's a good way to put this? I'm not putting this very well. I'm not putting this very well.
let go of the tiller.
You always feel like, no, I'm talking about the way it feels. It feels like, I can't think of a way to put it. That's very funny.
It just seems like you're flowing, like you're not doing anything, but you also feel like you're enjoying it somehow.
Well, there's the degree to which you resolve things,
right,
and then there's the fuzz of the unresolved, and you are, even if you're resolving things on a much, much, much finer level than you were 5 years ago, say, it still feels like the degree to which you're resolving things, and there's still the fuzz of the unresolved. So it's basically the same condition, even though if you look at it objectively and compare it to your frame of mind 5 years ago, your dullness of resolution is beyond your wildest dreams of how subtle and refined you could be with the experience in the past. Mm-hmm. You know, in other words, you always feel immature because you can always see that there's more. And yet you look back and you compare how you felt 20 years ago, and you're vastly more mature than you were then. But it doesn't necessarily feel that way in real time, because you still just feel like, well, here I am, and I have the degree of maturity I have, but there's so much more. You know, I don't know. I'm just not putting this very well today.
Peter, what do you mean by unresolved? Because I can't.
It's not good.
Yeah, unresolved.
That's not good.
There's no unresolved.
I'm trying to talk about
There's nothing to resolve.
I know. I'm trying to talk about the way that you feel like you're in the same place, even if you've progressed enormously.
Well, it does seem like things loop around, and kind of they kind of join up with an experience that seems very familiar from a previous time and place, even though there is a completely different take on that circumstance.
I can relate to that just growing up. I mean, I feel the same as I felt like I was when I was 4 years old. And yet I know a whole lot more, but I'm the same person. I still feel more or less the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That identity hasn't changed, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I'm the same nerd I've always been.
It seems to me there's a metaphor in dieting.
Yeah, that's a good one.
A what?
Dieting. So that if you weigh 400 pounds and you lose a pound, you've lost a pound. And
I see.
Once you've dieted for 5 years and you weigh 150 pounds and you lose a pound, you've still just lost a pound, but the significance of that last pound is so much different to the first pound.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No.
And you still feel like a fat slob.
And you're still dieting for whatever reason, but the significance of what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm really trying to say, and for some reason it's just totally like this tonight, is that there can be an enormous development in terms of your unfoldment, but you may not be subjectively aware of it because you tend to feel normal, and it essentially feels like the same normalcy you've always felt. So, and for some reason, like I said, I'm not being able to put that very articulate, and that's just not particularly important.
Well, the way that I feel, say from even a year ago, is I feel much more clarity, and I'm much more perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Even colors appear brighter
Yeah.
to me. So that's kind of how it feels to me.
Yeah.
Just there's a lot more clarity, and I'm just more perceptive to everything.
Yeah.
Notice notice things more, but just the patterns and the colors are just more glowing.
Yeah.
So.
No, this stuff works.
Yeah.
paying attention to the actuality of experience, paying attention to direct experience, accessing that to any degree that you can, outside the context of interpretation, is cumulative and transformative. It's that simple. This stuff works. It's actual and it's powerful, and it's very simple. So it's practically mechanical. I mean, it doesn't involve philosophy or learning or anything. You just feel your experience, and bang, something whams you. Because there's something there. Because experience itself is not inert. It's not neutral. It's alive. It's intelligent. It's hyper intelligent. So when you touch experience itself, the texture of experience, you're plugging into the mainframe. You're touching the divine. You literally are touching transcendence when you are just with experience itself. And how could that not be transforming? And it turns out, in fact, that it is. So.
Do you think that transformative change accelerates?
Don't know. I think it depends. I think it's probably quantized. It has spurts. There can be times when it seems to be jumps. There can be times where it seems to be relatively steady state. There can be times when it seems to accelerate. There can be times when it seems to be catastrophic. I mean, you can have just major revelations and flashes. Or there can be times when it seems to be very subtly gradual. But again, it's difficult to objectively assess because the way it feels subjectively is not really reliable.
Yeah, and what happens today, if it happens tomorrow, doesn't necessarily have any relationship to the past, so it's difficult to judge.
Yeah. It's all very slippery.
I've tried to capture the meaning or significance of your term texture. You use texture a lot. And I've always felt that I'm just missing your point. And can you say anything more about texture?
Sure. Texture is the fact that experience intrinsically, or reality intrinsically presents itself with characteristics, or as characteristics. Any kind of characteristics. Actuality is never presents itself as a nothingness. It's always got detail. It's got color, it's got brightness, it's got noise, it's got dynamism, it's got whatever characteristics are presented, and of course you don't need to classify them. Ultimately, you discover very immediately discover they're not classifiable anyway. But that's what I mean, is by being with the actuality, the detail of what is presenting, and what's actually present within experience, the nuance, the detail. So, exactly what is being seen, exactly what is being heard, exactly what is being, mentally experienced, or whatever, again. And the point is to be sensitively and inclusively with everything that's actually present in the way that it is present, which includes and will consist of characteristics in an inconceivable range of qualifiability, and ultimately it's all unqualifiable. So, for example, very superficially, if you were attending to vision, you notice color, you notice brightness, you notice contrast, whatever, and you don't do this analytically, but this is being with the specific characteristics of what is present. So not trying to look beyond something, but the actual interface of what is dominantly present is the thing itself. So exactly what your experience actually feels like, inclusively.
For me, though, like through my experiences of many years of what I thought was spacing out, was like going to that multidimensionality and infinitesimal. It's like you can't even pin it down. It's just so infinitesimal. And now I feel like the textures, now I'm aware, I'm not spacing out. It has a totally different flavor. It's like, oh, I was just trying to figure out, taking all the information, which is, and trying to nail it down.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, that.
Yeah.
And I can even explain it now in a way that I hadn't been able to.
Yeah.
You know, people go, where are you? Oh, well, I'm, what they thought I was just totally checking out. I was, well, no, I was just kind of tracking like a billion different details.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to explain those different. It's a palpable difference of awareness of what I was trying to do for so many years.
Yeah. Well, you intuited that there was valuable, that there was something there, and you're just refining that and validating it in this context.
Yeah, and it's in. I mean, wherever the textures are infinite.
Yeah, absolutely infinite and unresolvable, undefinable and nonlinear and multidimensional and blah 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 blah. So the textures is just a starting point. The textures is like your launch pad. So you start with the textures and then you go off into more of what could be called texture, but all of a sudden you can't call it anything very rapidly because it's just, but it's never nothing. It's not nothing. It's actual, and it's just, just never-endingly presentational. It's never-endingly presenting as whatever.
But the texture's still there.
Yeah, always. And unlimitedly and bottomlessly and fractally, harmonically developing and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just it's inconceivable. But it's very, very, very directly experienceable. And that direct experiencing is the real efficiently engaging with reality, which accelerates your unfoldment, maximally.
But the texture of seeing or hearing, isn't that still a holding pattern, or you're holding something to be?
No texture is a holding.
So if I'm seeing right now, so isn't that texture?
Absolutely.
But I'm seeing a room.
No, you're not. You're seeing light. You're calling it a room, and that room is and calling it a room is a texture of thought, which is simultaneously present. Vision doesn't call it a room. Thought calls it a room, and thought may happen concurrently with vision, and thought has its own texture.
What's the texture of thought?
Well, there's no words. It is what it is.
Got it, yeah.
You've experienced it directly. There's no words for the texture of light, but it's recognizable. I mean, all of these textures are jumping off points into their unspeakability. You might say, "Oh, light! I'm going to experience the texture of light now." But very rapidly, you go, "Yeah, but I can't say what light is, and I can't say what texture is." But it's definitely not nothing, and there's no limit to how subtly you can be with that, how deeply you can go into that, and just sort of feel this wow, because it's right here. It's right here, and it's infinitely nuanced, infinitely detailed, multidimensional, and you are with it already. So it's completely easy to do. You can't bring anything back from it that you can verbalize necessarily, but nonetheless, going into it as it is profoundly powerful. Nothing presents itself that's not real. Interpreting is real. It's real presence. what the interpretations claim to be is not real, but the interpreting itself is real present and is real presence, and the dynamism of that activity is real presence. So,
you mean what it's claiming to be interpreting isn't true.
Right, not true.
Right.
It's not true, but the presence of the interpreting is real. It's actual.
So what's interpreted is kind of a virtual reality.
Yeah, to claim. So there's a presence of vision, let's call it, and then there's a presence of interpretation, which is essentially a mental phenomenon, let's say. Of the vision is of a room with people in it, say. The interpreting is real, is present. The vision is present, but there's no room with people in it. But that interpretation is an abstraction of an actuality, which is this presence, which includes what you think of as a room and includes what you think of as people. But it's not actually a room, it's not limited in any way to being a room, and it's not limited in any way to being people.
Yeah, that's why it seems to me abstraction is kind of a virtual thing, because it's just kind of like what is it? Like in computing, you can do virtualization. There's like a Hyper-V, which puts out all of these virtual machines and virtual systems, and so that's what it kind of seems like.
Yeah, it's creating a version in imagination of that supposedly models an actuality.
Right.
But in this case, it inaccurately models the actuality because it oversimplifies. But it's the projection of an imaginary model which claims to be a modeling of the actuality, but that claim is inadequate because the modeling is so pathetically limited. It may even be fine as far as it goes, but it goes so it falls so far short of the actuality as to be completely irrelevant. So in other words, your interpretation of this is a room with people in it having a conversation, that's not untrue as far as it goes, but it goes like, a half an inch in a context of a billion light years. It's like it doesn't even scratch the surface of the actuality. So it's fine as far as it goes, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's not even like mostly comprehensive or even partially comprehensive. It's just like, it's just too oversimplified. That's a good way to put it. The actuality of presence, the actuality of experience, is inconceivably subtle and detailed and harmonic rich and information dense. And our modelings of it are just so paltry and heavy-handed. I mean, you heard the example I've given. It's like, okay, I'm going to give you these 3 matchsticks and using them model the galaxy. It's like, you're just not going to be able to do a good job because the tool you have is too coarse and simplistic relative to the actuality, which is much too subtle, complex, and nuanced. And that's what we try to do. We think that our thought and our interpretation of things, we think it's powerful, but that's because we're not noticing, we're underestimating how astoundingly unlimited this actuality is. We think it's just a room with people in it, so I just call it a room with people in it. Even if it's a little inaccurate, it's close. It's like, no, it's not. It's not even close. It's not even starting, let alone close. And we can discover that directly by noticing how nonlinear, how multidimensional, and how information dense our actual experience is. And this is what I call being with the texture of experience. Being with the detail. the actual experiential detail. And you see how much is omitted in our interpretations.
We're talking the subtleties of subtlety again.
Oh, yeah.
This is not gross realization somehow.
In what sense are you meaning that?
It's a nuance of awareness rather than a description of awareness. I don't know how to put that.
Well, it's the discovery that awareness is intrinsically very nuanced as opposed to taking it to be simple. You know, when we're with it in ignorance, when we're with it immaturely, we think what's going on here is a fairly simple system, and we think awareness is fairly simple, and we think, you know, and so so in that context, our interpretations of it, even if we notice they're heavy-handed, we think, yeah, but they're close enough because what we're trying to model is pretty heavy-handed. But the discovery is, oh my God, what's going on here is so nonlinear and so multidimensional and so nuanced and detailed that these, you know, it's just not even, it's laughable.
So much so that it's completely indescribable.
Yeah, exactly. And once you get that, you start being with undescribable in undescribability, and then all of a sudden you're engaged with it directly as it is, rather than through the gross inaccuracies of our interpretations, of our worldviews.
So you're saying what we know to be awareness is a gross simplification?
What you think it is, what you know is actual.
What our experience of awareness is only how we happen to be experiencing it, and
is what?
It sounded like you said that awareness is simplification.
Awareness is not simplification.
Even
what we think awareness is simplification. Awareness is not simplified.
But our experience of awareness could be much more so than our experience of it.
No, experience is already. No, the experience is already infinitely dimensional. We don't let ourselves notice that if we are sort of mesmerized by relating to it in terms of our interpretation of what it is. But the awareness itself, the experience itself, is and has always been and always will be infinite, unresolvable, multidimensional, so on and so forth.
But we limited it, as that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we limit it.
Experience of awareness.
We don't limit our experience.
Through interpretation.
Right. We don't let ourselves experience what we are actually experiencing, because we're sort of mesmerized by the self-fulfilling prophecy of what we think is going on. But that is not an actual limitation, it's a virtual limitation, because experience is actually of actuality. I mean, that's the power of this yoga, is you are already experiencing actuality, so as a result, it is possible at any instant to be with experience much, much, much more richly and profoundly than your interpretations can include, because you already are. I mean, that's the power of this. You don't have to do anything you're not already doing. You just have to notice that you are doing it, and then you discover the trick of being outside your interpretations, being outside of your worldview. Because you already are outside your worldview.
But I mean, we don't really know that we are inside
our
worldview.
Typically we don't.
Even know we're confining it.
Yeah, exactly. Typically not. Typically we think that worldview is reality.
Yeah.
And that's what ignorance. Yeah, and that's what ignorance consists of, is supposing that your worldview, not seeing that your worldview exists in imagination and is inaccurate, which prevents you from appreciating the actual access you have to unlimitedness, which your experience actually already has always and always will consist of. But again, since it is already the case, it's actually accessible. You can actually get outside your worldview any instant because you're not actually within it. And discovering that fact and playing with it and flirting with it is what the process of the discovery of this yoga consists of. Discovering that there are places in our experience already, in everyone's experience, there's already places that are outside their worldview. And wow, because right there, your foot is outside the door, so to speak. Your foot is in liberation. Your foot is in transcendence by that very fact. And all you need to do is go there, look around, so to speak, and you'll see that. You'll go, wow, this is pretty cool. And then, of course, from long habit, you'll probably go back and do your worldview and wallow around for a while. But once you discover that you can be out of it, you can go out of it and flirt around with that, play with that. And again, you'll typically feel like you're going back and forth for a while. But every time you go outside of it, it will be more powerful and it will be deconstructive of feeling entrapped within your worldview. And eventually you'll see that you aren't within the worldview, and then at that point you'll be free to come and go to it and never feel entrapped by it. The point is not to eliminate worldviews. The point is to discover their arbitrary tools that you are not stuck in. And then you can play with them or use them as you want.
They can be very useful.
Absolutely, sure.
It's an old woodcut of the person putting it.
No, that's so beautiful. It's so appropriate. Yeah. I love that.
But that step itself is just huge.
Yes, it is huge. Exactly, it's huge. But it's huge, but it's actually easy. It's actually small. Because in actuality, you're already there. So it's not actually as big a step as it seems. Yeah, the implication is huge, but the step itself is not huge.
I've been trying to think, why would I want to interpret? I do it so automatically now. I never figured out. I don't remember why I started it, but it seems the only reason I would want to interpret something is to position myself in a way so that when the future comes, I get some reward. In other words, I'm thinking of making a decision on the basis of that interpretation that will position me in a good position for the future when it catches up with me.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that's a faulty reasoning, because if I just stay in the present is going to take me to the future, and I'll be centered very nicely where I am.
Yeah. In actual fact, navigating life does not require worldviews. Worldviews are like game structures. Worldviews are like games. They're exactly like games. So you can play Monopoly, or you can play poker, or you can, play guessing games or whatever. And that's what worldviews are like. And they can be interesting as vehicles for exploring or communicating intelligence, but they're not particularly useful in most cases for actually navigating life. In terms of navigating with humans, they can be superficially useful, but not the actual navigation happens outside the context of worldviews. Once you are immersed more deeply in actuality, you will not be living your life in terms of worldviews or interpretations. You'll be living your life in terms of direct energy flows. So you won't have to think about what to do or things like that. You'll be very directly. Your life will be like spontaneous Tai Chi improvisation or something. It will be unpremeditated and non-linear and spontaneous and very intelligently engaged with actualities. Freedom, yeah. Shall we have a little break? We'll be back in a few minutes.
Like that makes any difference.
Spice it up.
Yeah, that's right.
So watch your fucking language.
That's right.
Peter, could you talk about the relationship between freedom and consciousness?
Sure. Consciousness is freedom. And the more consciousness, the more, let's say, comprehensively or completely consciousness is being what it actually is, the more freedom is manifest. So the process of spiritual unfoldment, for example, it might be said to consist of coming into your consciousness more and more as it actually is, more and more comprehensively as it actually is, which of course corresponds to a greater and greater apparent manifestation of freedom, or freedom being defined as unlimitedness and independence, independence of circumstance or of limitation.
So, consciousness is freedom.
Yeah.
But is freedom consciousness? No.
Well, there is no such thing as freedom.
Which, consciousness.
Yeah, but consciousness being what the word consciousness refers to, which is what this is.
This is, right.
Is also what the word freedom refers to.
Yes.
And of course, to understand what other consciousness actually is, or freedom actually is, you have to realize what this is, which of course completely transcends any notions of consciousness or freedom. So as usual, it's subtle. But it turns out that when the more deeply you let go into the nuance of what this is, the more you discover that what freedom is and what consciousness is, and the less any lack of freedom is perceived. An important aspect of freedom is the whole issue of the apparent limitation of patterning and the characteristics of the energy that appears. And the discovery that the patterning is actually unlimited, even though it may appear to be limited if it's looked at insensitively, is also the discovery of the way in which apparent lesser freedom or entrapment or limitation can appear to exist in a context, but it is actually open and pure freedom and pure spontaneity. And again, of course, you discover that as you discover more and more profoundly what this is.
I still have some mental concept of consciousness which somehow or other, and I'm not sure why or how, doesn't relate to freedom. That's why I asked the question is, consciousness to me implies a person.
Oh, okay. But again, that's not the actuality of consciousness. That's a misinterpretation of consciousness,
Yes.
Which, of course, will seem to be not free.
Yeah, it gets down to linguistics.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of any interpretation, in the case of anything you're indicating, like consciousness or freedom or, any quality whatsoever, it gets down to finding out what that actually refers to, which ultimately means finding out what this is. Because, of course, what everything refers to is this.
You can't find out what everything actually refers to.
Yeah. And so, of course, consciousness is this, freedom is this, to the extent it's anything.
Yeah.
And the actuality of this will completely transcend any notion of anything, of consciousness per se, of an individual and so on. Without necessarily contradicting it, just becoming so much deeper and richer and more multidimensional as to render the interpretation laughable and basically largely irrelevant, without necessarily being erroneous.
Yeah, it's not erroneous.
I mean, there's no consciousness, but that doesn't prevent the obviousness of consciousness being present is a fact, but it's actually not that. It's something really strange. Yeah, sure. Freedom is itself a heavy-handed interpretation. But the truth, the actuality and the truth and the profundity of what freedom actually consists of is this, which is the same thing that the actuality and profundity that consciousness actually consists of.
Yeah, I still have this thing in my head, and it's not. I think I misspoke when I said it was a person. Consciousness seems to me to have a granular reality. Somewhere, I mean, it's infinitely complex, but there seems to be a
Location?
No, it's not a location. A quality to consciousness which is not free. I can't put it into words, and it's my interpretation of consciousness. Obviously, it's not what consciousness is, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But I still have this sort of.
You mean like functional parameters, like a way in that it is, or?
No, it's more. Well, I don't know. I can't.
Well, of course, the overview of the situation is any concept you have is wrong. So it's really more a curiosity than anything else.
It's basically a worldview.
Yeah.
And I mean, given that that's a fucked view, it's but it persists.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, Narsagadaya was saying consciousness is in awareness, but awareness isn't in consciousness. Consciousness is an aspect of awareness. Sometimes those words are used synonymously.
Yeah, but again, it depends on knowing what you're referring to.
Yeah. So.
Consciousness can be contrasted with unconsciousness. For example, the consciousness you have waking and dreaming, contrasted with what you have in deep sleep or general anesthesia or death or something, which can be said to be a non-consciousness, but it's not a non-awareness because awareness is the substratum of being. But again, that's a subclassification of consciousness as a subcategory within awareness, which is kind of arbitrary because again, it's all a continuum. You know, awareness looks like, I mean, in those terms, awareness, the substratum awareness looks like the more superficial consciousness when you look at it in those terms, like in the waking state. But when you go to sleep or you get knocked out or you die or something, that apparition recedes, but the fundamental phenomena doesn't recede, and it hasn't changed at all. It's just presenting itself differently. So in other words, when you go from the waking condition, let's say, for an example, which we do very commonly, you go from the waking state into the deep sleep state, there's no loss of anything. There's a change of the so-called the dominant apparitional mode, but it's not actually a loss of anything. There's not less consciousness present. The consciousness / awareness merely shifts in its dominant mode of presentation, and then perhaps a more extreme version of that happens at death. But the background condition, the objective condition, the condition that is beyond space and time, is the same condition that appears as all these more superficial conditions of consciousness and personalization and individuality and all of that. What's a good example of that? Well, a star is a good example of that. A star is a manifestation of the properties of let's say a star is a manifestation of the properties of space-time. The properties of space-time obtain if there's no star. You just go to intergalactic space, and the properties of space-time are there. Those very same properties of space-time is what generates a star. When a star appears, it appears because of the properties of space-time. It happens to look like a star. And then one day that star explodes and it no longer looks like a star, but the properties of space-time haven't gone anywhere. And the properties of space-time didn't change when it was looking like a star. Another way to put that is in terms of the biosphere. The biosphere is here, and life forms exist as extrusions or manifestations of the biosphere. So a tree that happens to be growing is growing because the biosphere is there. The biosphere is there before the tree grows. Then a seed is planted, it sprouts, there's a tree, it has its lifespan, and it goes through seasons and blah, 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 and it dies. And while the tree is there, it's an expression of the biosphere. When the tree dies, the biosphere doesn't go anywhere, it's still the biosphere. So the biosphere is the unchanging condition within which manifestation occurs, but the manifestation doesn't add to the basic condition. And when the manifestation is not there, the basic condition is not any different than it was when it was there. And the condition of our various modes of apparition are the same. So when the waking condition is there, it's an expression of the basic condition. It's called the background condition. Okay, the deep sleep condition is a different kind of a expression of the background condition. And death may be a cessation of everything but the background condition. But in all modes, the background condition doesn't change whatsoever, and nothing else is actually present than the background condition. When the tree is blooming, nothing is present but the biosphere. It just happens to be manifesting as a tree in that locus. And the same with a star. When a star is present, nothing else is present but the fundamental conditions of space-time, let's call it. See what I mean?
This background condition.
Yeah.
Is that knowable?
Of course it is. The foreground condition is also the background condition. So it's knowable as this, it's knowable as itself. Calling it this versus an itself is completely arbitrary and absurd. This is the background condition. The tree is the biosphere. The star is space-time. But so is the space in between the star. Deep sleep and death are also the background condition, and the waking condition is the background condition. Nothing can be added to or subtracted from the background condition. And in other words, that alone exists. Let's call it being, or as Nisargadatta might call it, awareness. So that is the fundamental condition. And that condition can present itself in terms of various sort of presentational modes, and when it does so, nothing is added or gained to the background condition. And when it's not presenting in any of these various modes, nothing is lost from the background condition. So, an example is when you're sleeping, say you're in deep sleep and you start to dream, nothing has been added to the condition of sleep. And when the dream's over and you fall back into deep sleep, nothing is lost from the condition. It's just a shift in presentation of a condition that is just what it is, without change. And that's essentially our condition. When I refer to this, I'm referring to this background condition, which is all that is present here. But it can be present as an infinite range of apparent modes that are not actual. They're virtual modes that are just ways in which this fundamental condition shows itself.
So this is not, when you use the term this, you don't mean a substratum of what we're seeing. You mean what we're seeing is now the way this appears.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and whatever happens to be appearing is That is, I mean, that's always the case, inalienably. And even if it's not appearing as anything explicit, that's also the case.
The tree is the biosphere.
Yeah.
In motion, you could say.
Yeah, sure.
So the tree's not a tree; it's the biosphere.
Sure.
It's a manifestation.
Yeah.
Well, even calling it that is separating it somewhat. It's as though the biosphere and the tree are separate things. The tree is the biosphere.
Yeah, sure.
Confusion is in thinking that it's different. That's why I think there's a confusion of thinking that there is some consciousness or awareness that's different than what is being awared now, if you will.
Sure.
This is the background condition.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Going like this is the background condition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this is it.
Condition.
Yeah. And if you drop dead now, that's the background condition. And nothing has been gained or lost.
And all that, and rotting, that's the background condition.
Yeah. We know this experientially, very intuitively, because we aren't afraid to go to sleep. Going to sleep, even though it seems to be a complete loss of your life, your history, your waking condition, the deep intuitive somatic feeling tone of it is not of being a loss at all. You know when you go to sleep, you're not losing anything. All you're losing is the effort of needing to try to pretend to sort out and cope with all of this crazy stuff that's being thrown at you in terms of all the sensory differentiation. In deep sleep, that urgency is not apparent, but otherwise it's the same condition. And we know that on a very deep level, which is why we effortlessly go to sleep and effortlessly wake up, and we don't have the feeling we're losing anything or gaining anything when we do so. Right? I mean, when you go to sleep, it's just, yeah, okay. Right? I mean, it feels very, smooth or even welcome.
Sinking into the background condition.
Yeah, sure.
She said, if you're lucky. If you're a good sleeper like you, honey, you're a good sleeper. Propping up in a corner.
was reading this morning something that was analogous to what I was thinking last week, the difference between naming and defining. In the same way, this morning I was covering a different kind of ground, the difference between polarity and duality. In the sense that polarities are okay because they're just different takes on the same thing. But duality is where you actually have an abyss between. You have a negative and a positive thing, and they're really separate. And when you dualize, you're trapped. But to see the polarity of things is just to see the extreme or the full frequency range of one thing.
Yeah.
And that may seem like self-evident or maybe banal, but our worldviews are really based on these things one way or the other, and they can really trap us.
Yeah, it's very profound. You know, to see the self-evident fact that experience is infinitely differentiated within itself. In other words, how different can any portion of experience be from any other portion of experience? And the range is infinite, but it's an infinite difference within a continuum. Even if experience is different, it's never not experience. So it's a range. It's an infinite range of differentiation within one thing. Or, you know, another way of asking that same question or looking at that same issue is, how many different things can you dream about? How many different ways can a dream appear? Well, it's you know, let's say it's virtually unlimited. It's at least virtually unlimited, if not actually unlimited, in what you could dream about. But you never dream about anything but a dream. So again, it's absolute. You know, it's an either absolute or incredibly broad range spectrum of differentiation within essentially one condition, which does not depart from itself. You know, so an experience is self-evidently that way. I mean, you can look at your field of vision. How many different intensities and colors and so on of light are perceivable? And just in any instant, you know, it's virtually, if not literally infinite, it's virtually infinite. I mean, the range of the nuance of colors and brightness, intensities, and so on that can be seen is staggering. And yet it's all just vision. It's all light. So it's clearly one thing appearing as virtually infinitely different than itself. I mean, you know, no pixel of your field of vision at any time is exactly identical with any other pixel of your field of vision in terms of exact shade of color, exact brightness of intensity of brightness, and so on and so forth. Right? And of course, the same thing applies across the board as you look at different aspects of experience.
So I did relate that to the tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And the abyss which separates things. And that abyss is just a thought, just an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Once we believe that there are two separate things and separation is a reality, then we have this abyss, but the abyss is just an abstraction.
Yeah, it's defined into existence.
We've defined it.
Yeah, and then it's reified to the extent it's believed in, which is basically ignoring the fact of its not actual existence.
But wars are fought over the abyss.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't exist.
All wars are fought over that abyss.
So these are practical considerations.
Very. Realization's the answer. Go out and sow seeds.
As long as they don't come from Genentech. Monsanto. That's the bad one.
The abyss is an interesting concept, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It implies all sorts of societal interpretations, but to me it implies emptiness.
Yeah.
And yet it's infinitely full.
Yeah, well, the actuality of abyss turns out to be a strong metaphor of the actual condition.
Yeah.
But the fantasy of an abyss, as most people might consider it, is the contrasting nothingness in relation to the somethingness of of relative non-abyss conditions, and then you have this dichotomy between real conditions and then the threatening abyssness of nothingness.
Yeah, when I was at the Grand Canyon, I thought of the word abyss.
Yeah.
And then it led to abysmal.
Well, abysmal is literally reference to an abyss.
An abyss, absolutely.
Of course.
Yes. It was a good place to contemplate the abyss.
Yeah. Oh no, the Grand Canyon is exquisite. I mean, it's a wonderful meditation being
Yeah, he
there.
wants to be abysmal.
So, is it possible to have consciousness if you don't have a subject and object paradigm?
Well, of course, depending on what you mean by consciousness.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get. Consciousness, I've been used to the Vedanta consciousness, which is the absolute, basically.
Oh, okay.
But actually, then I find the Buddhists are talking about consciousness in terms much more like the personal mind.
Right.
They have something that's quite different going, and I've had a little bit of trouble just philologically or semantically or whatever.
Well, the problem is using similar words for dissimilar definitions. So it's just a semantic issue. It's just a matter of defining your terms. If you look at consciousness as the intrinsic, we call it self-referentiality of reality, I mean, in the most primal level, in the sense that we were talking earlier, maybe like Nisargadatta was referring to awareness. I mean, Nisargadatta, for example, apparently drew a distinction between awareness as a primal condition and consciousness as a sub-condition that existed within the context of awareness, which is more analogous to the sort of Buddhist condition that you were implying. But again, it's a question. It's really just a question of specifying what you mean by your terms. And in actuality, all of that differentiation is meaningless because all conditions, in actuality, defer to the one condition, because all conditions are the one condition. There are no actual subconditions. Differentiation is not actual.
So even awareness doesn't really touch this.
Well, nothing touches it. Nothing can refer to it, or you could say everything and anything refers to it exactly. Awareness is this. Non-awareness is this. Consciousness is this. Stupidity is this. Realization is this. The matter is this. Energy. It doesn't, because obviously anything that exists has to be this because this is actually what exists. And all these words imply separate qualities, and the apparent separateness of these qualities that's implied by the words is inaccurate. It's not actually like that. It's just that what this is happens to be a condition that can present itself with an apparently infinite range of differentiation, apparently infinite range of differentiable apparent characteristics or characterizations, or however you want to put it. And so if you start differentiating these apparent differentiations as if they were actually separate, you can make as many long lists as you want of different conditions. But since they're just modes of presentation of one thing, that's kind of an absurdity, or just gamesmanship. And again, we get down, that's just, talking about consciousness, this version of consciousness or that version of consciousness, or of anything, is just a specific example of that, of course. I mean, this is this. And that's the most accurate thing that can be said. Or as accurate as can be said, let's say. This is this, and and then anything else you say boils down to saying this is this, just with greater, more elaborate vocabulary, which is unnecessary because if there's 100,000 words in the dictionary, they're all just synonyms of this. So why bother? Why not just this? Okay, this is, or this is this. Okay, cool. There's nothing else to say, and anything else you do say is just a fancy way of saying this is this, so why bother? Or you might say, why not bother? And that's fine too.
Well, it's still a conversation.
Like
yeah.
Monty Python.
Yeah. It does, doesn't it? What is this?
Is this differentiate? Is this?
That's what I was beginning to sort of understand about my faulty understanding of the term texture. I've seen the rug has a texture, true, the floor has a texture.
Yeah.
Everything has a texture, and I was looking at that.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is that this has many different textures, and the rug and the floor and all of these are just different textures of this.
Yeah. But when you are with the specific texture of the rug, you're with the texture of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the rug is a doorway, so to speak, to this. I mean, not that it's an actual doorway and that the this is separate from it, but, practically speaking, the door is an access point of this. The floor is an access point of this. The field of vision as a whole is an access point of this. That particular light is an access point of this. The thought of anything is an access point to this, and so on and so forth. So anything whatsoever you can try to indicate is nothing other than an access point to this. And my talking about being with the texture or presence of an actuality, experiential actuality, is trying to indicate that fact. And so in other words, it's not a matter of being with the rug and then trying to somehow transcend it to some thisness which is somehow somewhere else. No, this texture of the rug, this is it. This is the this right there. That's bang. That's the finish line. As is the floor, as is the socks, as is the feeling of the chair under your butt, as is whatever. So it's just that, so there's an awful lot of jumping off points. There's an awful lot of dimensional portals, hyperspatial dimensional portals into this available within our experience. Virtually anywhere within our experience is a jumping off point into this. And even, of course, calling it a jumping off point is just an absurdity. It is this itself. But, if you think of it as a jumping off point, then you can, start with a rug and you're ending up with transcendental inconceivability without going anywhere.
It seems that there has been experience associated with spiritual practices that had brought up the use of the term void, which is, I think, the same as what you were speaking of, as not just a take or just a viewpoint, but as an actual experience of I don't know what other people were experiencing, but it does seem to be something that is an expression of a development of spirituality.
Yeah, it can be, and again, it depends on what you mean by the term. And this is a fine point, and it's from a sort of a yogic, from a practical point of view, it's a very important fine point. In Dzogchen, in a more advanced Dzogchen practice teachings, they're very careful to differentiate this because they say that it's easy, talking about the errors of Dzogchen practice, it's very easy to hold some kind of a state of nothingness or non-existent or cessation, relative or apparent cessation of phenomena or thought as being identical with the ground. But this is a misunderstanding. And they, may differentiate that kind of a condition as a void condition, sort of taking a condition of voidness, a condition of cessation as ultimate reality. Whereas in actuality, it's a constructed condition. It's a condition that is essentially imagined, because the actual condition is intrinsically lively and dynamic, and will have an intrinsic propensity to present in an infinite range. Technically put, Dharmakaya shows up as Sambhogakaya intrinsically. So actual powerful Dzogchen practice is with spontaneous liveness, not with some condition of stasis or cessation or some sort of a forced emptiness that is empty of conditions. So there's that aspect of it, for example. But again, but then again, there's more. It's really, it's a semantic, it's a semantic worm's nest, because void is also synonymous with emptiness, which is, at its highest level, an expression of the unresolvability of actuality. Nothing can be found as anything. Nothing can be found to be anything. But that's not a negation of positivity. Nothing is nothing either. Nothing. A condition of nothingness cannot be found. But no condition can be found as anything in particular, which is the truth, the true condition of emptiness. But it's not a nothingness. It's always an intrinsic positivity.
So the experience of the world disappearing, or just everything disappearing, is, you're saying, a constructive?
Well, it depends how you put that, again, because we always get to, when we talk about these things, we always end up looking at semantics, which is fine. In a profound sense, the world disappears. But this doesn't go away. This apparition doesn't go away. But this apparition is not the world. So again, that may sound like splitting hairs, but it's relevant in terms of what you mean, looking at what you mean by these terms. In realization, the world disappears, but your experience doesn't go away.
The world disappears in terms of
as a world.
There being
definition.
solid forms.
Yeah.
Or
There being anything with any coherence or any findability. In other words, the world disappearing in that context is synonymous with the discovery of the fact of emptiness, which does not change experience because experience always was empty. But you are with experience as emptiness rather than with experience as hallucinating that it's solid entities in the world and so on. But a condition of a permanent condition of absolute elimination or cessation or voidness of phenomena is not actual. I mean, one of the and again, this is endlessly subtle and it cannot be ultimately resolved. The most primal condition of the ground state can be seen to be. It looks an awful lot like a nothingness, but at the same time, it's not an actual nothingness; it's an actual everythingness. Look at it this way: have you ever had general anesthesia? Well, you know what did the world look like when you were under? It looks pretty close to nothing, and you looked pretty close to nothing, and your experience looked pretty close to nothing, but it wasn't an actual nothingness. In fact, it was a profound field of fullness and radiance, but it's subtle. And what that was is exactly what this is now. I mean, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. And the after-death condition will be the same. The absolute ground condition is as close to nothing as you can get, but it's actually not a nothingness, it's an everythingness. So, but again, this can't be pinned down, so it's kind of silly to even talk about it. But the point being, in terms of looking at these sort of spiritual teachings of voidness and emptiness and all that, to get a handle on the experiential actuality that is being addressed, and also look at the semantic confusion, which is kind of implicit in different ways of taking these terms or holding them. You always have to check in with experience to know what anything refers to. And the very nature of experience is it has an infinite range of presentation without ever departing from what it is. So, if nothing can appear, then that nothing is an apparitional mode of the ground condition. If delusion can appear, then that delusion is an apparitional mode of the ground condition, and so on and so forth. So this can look like nothing to the extent that nothingness could appear, but it wouldn't be an actual nothing because it would be this, which is the same this that looks like everything, and so on and so forth. It gets very confusing, mainly because ways of putting things don't correlate and are on a one-to-one basis with what they're referring to. We have all of these words, and they're all referring to essentially one condition, but they're referring to it as if it was wildly different than itself, which it isn't really, even though it arguably can seem to be if you don't look very closely. Yeah.
It's always interpretation.
It seems like that the void and the nothingness are kind of like, a major cop-out in the sense that they're taken to disempower our everyday experience.
Yeah, sure.
Take us to a place where we actually have no say in what's actually going on. But, if we look, that doesn't actually appear to be true.
Yeah.
But there's this dissonance between, our fantasy and our reality.
Yeah.
And then investigation kind of confirms it. In fact, it's sort of a relief, really, to confirm that nothingness doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The actual condition is a sublime transcendental positivity. It just simply happens to be the case. So any nothingness that could exist would be that. So it wouldn't be an actual nothingness. It would just be an apparent nothingness as an apparitional mode of this sublime transcendental positivity.
And is that what they're referring to as Dharmakaya?
Dharmakaya is a universally applicable ground condition. Nothing but Dharmakaya exists. And then the effervescent or creative or radiant aspect, the fact that Dharmakaya is inherently positive, is Sambhogakaya. So Dharmakaya has a tendency to appear characteristically, and that's Sambhogakaya. And then the total field of characteristics that do appear is Nirmanakaya. But again...
But none of them exist independently.
No, they're just different ways of putting this condition.
Yeah.
So different ways of looking at it.
But they're actual breadcrumbs too. It's
yeah.
kind of like, to me, Buddhism is like this really trickster kind of study because
Sure.
it like gives you enough and then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're valid. They're valid and pithy indications. But as with all valid and pithy or less valid and less pithy indications, the trick is to use the indications to get to what is indicated, which is the whole point. Like the indications are just jumping off points. They're diving boards into the indicated. And that's the case with all spiritualities, Spirituality is about something. Get to that something. Don't hang out in the spirituality. Or spiritual teachers, Forget about the teacher. Look at what the teacher is interested in. That's what's interesting. So all of this, all of these indicators are, proverbial fingers pointing at the moon. The moon's what's interesting, not the fingers. And that applies across the board in all these spiritual teachings and teachers and philosophies and blah, blah, blah.
Well,
to
the
the thing itself.
is in a sense the realization that there is some way to get to.
Yeah.
As opposed to there just being a journey or
Absolutely.
an idea.
Yeah, there is, there's a there, and that there is here, and you are here, check it out.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing. It is not nothing. Those signs like you see in a shopping center, you are here.
Yes.
The little red dot.
They actually mean something.
Yeah, that's the whole point. You are here.
Like,
It's a sign.
This is. And all the fuss and hoopla is about that fact. Or, to be more concise, this fact.
well, and actually those signs are of no use if you don't actually look and see where you are.
Well, that's the point. It ain't the words, it's the here-ness.
And even if you do look, it doesn't make any difference.
It seems to not make any sense.
So relative, John.
This is a beautiful dance.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's exquisite. Well, it's just about quitting time, so that's a nice high note. Good night, online people.